Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. The current meta here in Warzone Season 3 Reloaded obviously got a decent shakeup with the Season 3 Reloaded update itself. And so today, I wanted to go through and break down the entirety of the new meta update. Now that we've been able to go through, see the updated stats for various different weapons, got hands-on things, been able to actually test them, we can go through and really accurately rank what is considered absolute meta, the best of the best, obviously, what's more in the meta conversation and pretty solid, all things considered, what's just generally a contender, more competitive at best, what's more viable, you could use it but it's not really all that great, and then what's either niche or trash, you just have no purpose in using really any of this. So quite a bit to break down here today. I do have my handy dandy list of notes over here with all the various meta updates that took place with Season 3 Reloaded. First up though, we do have a new SMG to rank, the Ladra, and they've made this extremely easy. This is an absolute meta choice. This thing's got the recoil control, the TTK, pretty good range. It's doing everything right here. It is a beast of an SMG and one of my new go-tos in all of my loadouts for some close range dominance. So that is a very, very easy drop in. That thing is fantastic. But now we can go through and detail all of the actual weapon changes and see how this adjusts weapons throughout the list. So first up here, AK-74 ended up seeing a headshot and a lower torso nerf, then also a sprintifier, an ADS, and then also a strafe speed nerf as well, which in theory it's like, okay, that was a lot of nerfs, but in actuality doesn't really impact the AK all that much. Yes, the damage is going to be a little bit worse because of those multipliers, but ultimately its base damage profile is still fantastic. It's insane in the close to mid range, and it's still really effective over long range as well. So it's a little bit worse than it was before the update, but it's still an absolute meta option easily. Funny enough, the AMAX and the Kilo actually got reload buffs here. Basically, the ADS on that Kilo is also a little bit better here, but the reload's a little bit faster, so that's solid there, but no changes to the damage profiles. Now, a lot of MW3 and MW2 weapons actually ended up seeing some decent updates with this patch, which is exciting for sure. First up here, the Bal 27 actually got a damage buff, but a range nerf, and the recoil is a little bit better. Currently, we have this sitting in the contenders category. I do think that's probably where it's going to stay for the time being, just because the Bal 27 DPM is really inconsistent. Obviously, with the rate of fire changing after the first 4 bullets, some players can really capitalize on that and use that to their advantage, and in that case it's probably more of a meta conversation option. But ultimately, I think because kind of the weird recoil that comes with that, the weird damage per mag, the sort of inconsistency there really depends on where you're landing your shots within its fire rate. It's more of just a pretty decent competitive option, but not going to be like a top tier, highly picked choice. The Holger 556 also saw a damage buff and a range nerf, and its velocity gets a tad bit better here. They also upped the extended mag to 50, which is solid for sure. Unfortunately though, its damage versus some of the meta contender rifles is just not up there still. You have the better feeling even at the end of the day. Model L, Krig, etc. here, it's still lacking just a little bit in that damage department when you compare the TTK stats, but overall it's still a solid modern warfare option if you're looking for something fresh there. It just, I think, needs a little bit more to truly rise up into that meta conversation. Now the M4, previously in the viable category, really just existed, didn't do anything fancy. It's a lot better now. Its range and its damage got buffed, its velocity got buffed, its recoil is easier now. This is one that we are taking out of viable, and I think it's more so gonna be actually in the meta conversation tab here. Like, this is honestly an option that can compete pretty closely with some other great rifles. Like, it's not too far off of the AMAX and the AK. It still has a little bit of a weird feel because it's not a Black Ops 6 gun, but it's up there with some other fantastic rifle choices, and definitely in that general meta conversation now, which is cool to see such a large increase on a weapon that hasn't had much time in the spotlight as of late. The TAC 56 is kind of getting a similar treatment here too, which is solid. It got a damage buff, a range nerf, a velocity buff, and a recoil buff as well, and it's actually going to leave the viable category. And I think this one also falls back down into that meta conversation category as well here. So huge jump ups from the TAC and the M4, both capable of competing with some other top tier rifles. Not necessarily going to be #1 most dominant option, and still the feel is a little different compared to Black Ops 6 guns. There's no gunfighter available on these, but a noticeable increase in their overall effectiveness, which is fantastic. Now the HRM and the WASP 9 each ended up seeing a few updates as well. We currently have them sitting in the viable category alongside a lot of other MW2 and MW3 guns, of course. With each of these, they ended up getting a damage buff and a range nerf. The HRM actually got a torso multiplier nerf, whereas the Wasp 9 got a sprint to fire, headshot, and torso nerf as well. Really, with these, while the damage is slightly better and they're okay in the first damage range, they don't really have the capabilities beyond that. The HRM 9 really drops off, so I think that sitting in viable is probably going to be the most appropriate place for it. The Wasp 9 is maybe borderline more competitive here, maybe jumping up into the contenders category, but also I'm not necessarily going to lean towards the Wasp 9 over some of the other SMGs in this category, even from MW3, for instance, whether it's the Supri, the Static, the Ram 9, the Striker, etc. The MX9 is another option currently sat here in viable that sees a large jump up. This one is absolutely climbing into the meta contender category here, which is fantastic to see. This thing got a better extended mag. Now it's up to 50, which is great for all game modes. Damage and a range buff, a velocity buff, then a slight sprint to fire speed nerf, which is okay. It's already very fast as is. This thing is feeling fantastic right now. Honestly, its TTK is competitive with things like the Compact, the PPSH, the SOG. Again, still has that slight difference in feel. The attachment selection is not fantastic, but it's truly in that meta conversation and totally usable against other good SMGs if you know what you're doing with it. And by the way, as we are breaking down all the weapon changes and how the current meta shakes out, if you enjoyed the video, you find the info helpful, a like rating is always seriously appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, you want to guarantee that every single day you're in the know for all things going on in COD, no better place than right here. So feel free to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. Following that, the PDSW also saw some updates: damage buff, a range buff, a velocity nerf, an ADS speed buff, and then a recoil buff. Currently sitting in viable, it's definitely more competitive than that now, which is really nice to see. Honestly, it's close between being in the meta conversation, similar to the MX9, or just in the contenders category. I think the safer spot for it probably is that contenders category. It's close, but also I do think I'd pick the MX9 over it in several situations. Again, attachment situations a little bit awkward. The feel of it's still a little bit awkward compared to BO6 choices, but that's still a large jump up for the P90. Now the Marine SP currently sits in the contenders category. It's going to stay here, but it's definitely more effective. It did get a damage buff, which is solid to see there. And always nice when a shotgun actually feels somewhat usable in the meta. I know some players love them and then other players absolutely hate them. They really haven't done a great job balancing shotguns in a long time in Warzone, but the Marine is certainly one that you can get away with using in that close range. Lockwood 680 kind of in the same scenario here, was all right before. They actually ended up buffing its range, which is nice to see. So again, I think that one's just going to sit in the contenders category. Obviously, you're still super limited in what range you can actually use these to begin with, but it's a serviceable option for sure. Now the Pulim Yacht currently sits in the viable category. It really hasn't been anything that crazy in some time. They did end up buffing its damage and its range. It also got a recoil buff and a headshot buff as well. I think this is one that is still really heavy and really slow, and for that reason, even though the damage is a little bit better, it's one that I don't think many players are going to actively seek out because of its mobility. Obviously, with the conversion kit, it's a little bit different, more rifle-like, and it's viable there for sure. But I think even though it is better than it was before the update, obviously, there are more consistent choices in the contenders category, even within the LMG category, and then definitely beyond that in the meta and absolute meta conversation. So unfortunately, the Pulim Yacht, not much is shifting with its placement, but it is a little bit better if you're a fan of the gun. Now the Eradicator currently sits in the contenders category. This also saw some updates to its damage and its range. Both of those got buffed, which is solid. Again, I think this is a pretty appropriate place for it to be, maybe even more so now, just as a competitive choice for sure. I'm definitely a big fan of the Eradicator and how it feels, how it plays. But in terms of damage, I still think I'm leaning maybe a few other choices here and there, but it's still a very solid LMG option now. Nice to see that it's becoming more effective. Now the RAL base weapon ended up seeing a close damage buff, but then a range nerf. So really interesting change there. What did happen with this update, at least as of the time that I'm recording this, is the Proteon kit goes absolutely crazy. So much so that I would consider it borderline broken. We covered this in a video the other day. Now, recording this in the present, once that video goes out and this video gets posted a few days in the future, maybe they end up updating this to a certain extent. We'll have to wait and see, but for now I'll be dropping this in the absolute meta category. There may or may not be a post edit Zach later on in the video adjusting this, so stay tuned. The Sakin ended up seeing a damage buff and a range nerf as well. This currently sits in the viable category. I do think that that does actually make it a bit more of a contender. It's able to compete a little bit better now just in general. Again, it's still a very heavy, very slow LMG at the end of the day, but at least it's going to be better than it was before the update. Now, the AEK currently sits in the meta conversation, the meta contenders category, as the aftermarket part, the full auto mod, is pretty solid. They ended up buffing the base gun though with its damage and its range. It also got a velocity buff. Unfortunately, the base gun doesn't really get much better after that update. Like, obviously it is better, but in terms of true competition, it goes from being just absolute trash to a little bit stronger. The full auto mod is still very reliable though, and that stays in the meta contender category. Now, the DM10, very excited about this. This got a range buff, a velocity buff, an ADS buff, and then also a flinch buff as well. This goes from already being a very, very good option. Oh, and by the way, every single non-bolt action marksman uses rifle ammo right now, so that obviously applies to this, the TR2, etc. DM10 jumping up into that meta contender category. This thing feels phenomenal right now. It feels very much so DMR like. It's not as broken as that was back in the day, but so good for a semi-auto option. Now, the Grau conversion for the SWAT is still an absolute meta choice easily, and that's why it sits here in this category. The base SWAT saw some buffs though. Range and damage both got buffed, and then the velocity got buffed. The base SWAT's not going to be anything to write home about, but the Grau conversion is still great. TR2 actually ended up seeing a close damage nerf, but then a long range damage buff, so it's even better against snipers and other long range options. And this thing's TTK is crazy. Honestly, I would consider it to be an absolute meta option. I mean, this thing can absolutely melt if you're good with semi-auto guns. High skill gap weapon for sure, but also extremely high reward at the same time. Now, the Sarkov, I have this in the viable category. Maybe I was pre-firing this update with this, because I would have this beneath trash if I could. I can't stand the way that this weapon feels. It's my least favorite gun in the game by far, but they did buff the damage and the range. It's still not very good, so maybe the viable category is where it sits better now as opposed to before. But yeah, this thing is just miserable to pick up in my opinion. Now, the HDR did see a slight nerf. They nerfed the ADS speed on it. Not going to be a huge difference. It's still the best one-shot sniper. And then lastly, the Imperium actually saw some buffs. They buffed the range and the damage, which is solid there. It's still not going to be an infinite one-shot headshot, but it's an absolute meta conversation contender here for sure, you know, able to compete against the Frostline or the LR762, the other limited one-shot range snipers. But overall, I mean, this meta is insanely competitive right now. And what do you know, post-edit Zach here, because the day before I was ready to upload this video and get it out for you guys, they ended up doing a slight meta update. They adjusted the AK-74 by nerfing it a little bit, the AMAX a little bit. They also buffed the Krig. Really, the main takeaway from this is that this meta tier list we just went through pretty much stays the same, outside of the fact that I would bump the Krig back up into the absolute meta category with the recoil buffs, the slight damage buffs that it got as well. It's certainly capable of contending with those other top options. I will say I think the Ames probably drops out of that meta category down into the meta conversation category. That one is maybe a little bit overrated there, but really, in this absolute meta category here, these options are insane, and seeing this many options as truly fantastic choices is awesome. Like, each of these genuinely has an argument to be considered the meta, right? Whether you're fighting close range, mid range, long range, the general meta conversation weapons that are really, really close to being fantastic and overall play really well, also solid. And then there's even some good competitive choices now because of so many updates to these MW2 and MW3 options. So really cool to see that. That is how the current meta plays out though post season 3 reloaded. That's gonna wrap things up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like on it, and if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.